Good evening to everyone here in North America, and to those in Asia, good morning. I welcome all of you. My name is Denis Simon, and I currently wear a number of hats here at Duke. I am Senior Advisor to the President here at Duke for China Affairs, as well as I also am the Executive Director for the Center for Innovation Policy at Duke, and I hold a faculty appointment in the Fuqua School of Business. Today it's my great pleasure to bring to you Professor Richard Freeman and Dr. Qingnan Xie, who are going to talk to us about the current state and future potential of U.S.-China science and technology cooperation. And they have a very interesting title called "Till Politics Do Us Part." And this is a very, very timely topic. In fact, I can tell you today in Shanghai, as we are conducting our seminar, there will be a fairly large seminar at the Institute of Science and Technology Management in Shanghai, bringing together a lot of China's own S&T experts. I recorded a video earlier today for that program, as did a colleague, Carolyn Wagner from Ohio State. And so it's very interesting that these kind of issues are attracting so much attention in both countries. And it's a great opportunity for us to compare and contrast notes on the subject. I'm very happy that APSI has decided to sponsor this series on China innovation. This is the second one this semester. We'll have two more, one in November and one in December. We are also have co-sponsorship of our program, first from the Duke's Center for International and Global Studies, and second also from the Center for Innovation Policy at the law school. So I welcome all of you, and we will take questions later on in our program. The two presenters are going to first present a PowerPoint, talk to us for about 35 minutes or so, and then we'll set aside another 40 minutes for Q&A from the audience. So we hope for a very lively discussion. So let me introduce our two speakers. First, let me introduce Richard Freeman, who holds the Herbert Ascherman Chair in Economics at Harvard University. He is a research associate also at NBER and is currently serving as the faculty co-director of the Labor and Work-Life program at the Harvard Law School and is co-director of the Harvard Center for Green Buildings and Cities. So I see Richard keeps himself very, very busy. Professor Freeman is a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and the AAAS. He is currently serving on the AAAS Initiative for Science and Technology, and he has served or is serving on 12 panels and boards of the U.S. National Academy of Sciences. Professor Freeman received the Mincer Lifetime Achievement Prize from the Society of Labor Economics in 2006. In 2011, he was appointed the Francis Perkins Fellow of the American Academy of Political and Social Sciences. In 2016, he was named a Distinguished Fellow of the American Economic Association. In fact, the award citation describes Richard as, quote, an enormously innovative labor economist who has made pioneering contributions to virtually every aspect of the field, unquote. Professor Freeman's research interests include the job market for scientists and engineers, the transformation of scientific ideas into innovation, Chinese and Korean labor markets, the effects of artificial intelligence and robots on the job market, and forms of labor market representation and employee ownership. His most recent publication is U.S. Engineering in a Global Economy, that was published in 2018. He is joined by a recent PhD who completed a PhD this summer. This is now Dr. Qingnan Xie, who finished her PhD at the School of Intellectual Property at Nanjing University of Science and Technology, Nanjing Ligung Daxue. She was a student there from September 2014 till August 2021. She's also been a Wertheim Fellow at the Labor and Work-Life program at Harvard Law School at Harvard University from 2016 to 2018. She received a Bachelor of Engineering in Optical Engineering at the School of Electronic and Optical Engineering at the Nanjing University of Science and Technology. It gives me great pleasure to present the two of them to our audience. As I said, there is no more timely topic than the issue of what's going on in Chinese science and how that relates to the United States. We know that the numbers of scientific and engineering personnel in China as part of a much larger research establishment in China has been growing steadily since 2000. Today, there seem to be about 1.87 million researchers in China compared to about 1.43 million in the United States. So on a per capita basis, of course, this is a small number for China, but on an absolute basis, the Chinese seem to have a very substantial effort underway. We also know that the quality of this talent pool is steadily improving as a result of the investment that's been made in Chinese universities and a number of the reforms that have been carried out in the higher education sector. China in 2018 graduated almost 50,000 PhDs, a number that surpasses the United States and the EU in that period. There are also have been about 6 million plus Chinese students who have studied abroad. Right now, we have over 370,000 Chinese students in the United States. And to its credit, China has been able to reverse a serious brain drain problem into a brain gain. And now a steady number of Chinese who had stayed abroad are making the decision to return home to take up positions across China business and government, industry, et cetera, et cetera. China now is among the leaders in terms of peer-reviewed articles and co-authored articles in the top peer-reviewed and cited journals. Its record in terms of patents is also admirable in terms of just how it's come from almost nowhere to be one of the most key countries in terms of patent implementation and registration. Some people have suggested that this all taken together makes China somewhat of an unstoppable juggernaut. And as many of you who follow this issue know, this has become cause of great concern in the United States. As one person said, the Chinese are going to eat our lunch. Obviously, that's somewhat of an exaggeration. And if you would talk to colleagues in China, they would look at you with a great deal of consternation because I'm not sure that they yet believe that China has surpassed the United States or is about to do that. Now, one of the consequences of this growing concern about China is the impact that it has had on international collaboration, and particularly in terms of bilateral collaboration between the US and China. After almost 4 decades of very positive sum collaboration, today we are seeing almost a paralysis in terms of the level of cooperation. Of course, things are going forward in some areas, but there's a great deal of anxiety and apprehension that exists about moving ahead and taking up some of the big global problems that need to be solved and that require close US-China cooperation. So we need to better understand where China is headed and whether or not the current state of affairs in terms of the restrictions or constraints on collaboration are going to have a big impact on China in the coming months and coming years. So I can think of no two better people who have worked in this field than Richard Freeman and Qingnan Xie. So without further ado, let me turn the screen over to them, and I will look forward to your presentation. Thank you.
Okay, well, thanks for the nice introduction, and you'll see the material fits very well with your opening comments. I'm going to do is share the screen with you. I'll talk through, I suppose, the first part of the talk, and then Qingnan will pop back and give our concluding comments and some very exciting new things we've just done. So right now I'm going to share the screen and hope that works smooth. And can everyone see it? It's okay? Okay.
Not
So,
yet. No, I don't see it up
not
there.
yet on.
Now it's there. Now it's gone.
Okay, just a little slow. Okay. Okay, so we're going to talk mostly about the partnership, and we'll say some things at the end about the what and how one might analyze if this partnership breaks down because of political or other concerns. So there's the four topics we'll do, and I'm going to do 1 through 3, and then Qingnan will do the fourth. Okay. So let me get. Whoops! I got to now make sure the screen it will move down nicely. Oops. And here we go. I'm just going to start with the first place that we are really closely linked with China, and that's as Denis referred to, we have a large number of students from China in the U.S. You see the curve looks like it's a logistic curve, the total numbers leveling off. Very few U.S. students in China. We looked at the distribution of these students between graduates and undergraduates, and you see it's pretty much the same. Over 1/3 of international students in the U.S. are from China. They are the #1 place that where we get international students, and we are the #1 destination for China. Since we're going to be talking about scientific and engineering workforce and people writing academic papers and doing making innovations, we're going to focus on PhDs. China is #1 in PhDs, over twice the number from India, which is the second biggest. And through 2019, the U.S. after their PhD is for 2020, and those are large figures. So the biggest number of people who are working in the country post their PhD are clearly these. There's been some concern over issues about with the COVID, and as well for as the American government about Chinese students for the military, quote, learning things we wouldn't want them to learn, perhaps. From the New York Times, and the number of people who the U.S. would not allow in was just a couple of hundred people, what the government says are critical areas. Okay, but we are together in this area. What allows the huge flow of students to the U.S. Is that China not only allows people to go over, the 2 or 3 years later, the Chinese get better educated, and a lot of that was, of course, to the U.S. and the government gives scholarships to visiting students overseas. I don't know any other government in the world that does that. Allows basically the student, and they get accepted at a university, and bang, they get some. The same point, the U.S. as the destination country rules that accept things, accept people. And in the US, that's so important because so many of our scientists are foreign born, and China is this big flow. And I come with the core division of science. In the Soviet Union, it was extremely difficult for scientists to leave the country to give seminars or make trips to the Western world. And people were told before they left was a hostage, more or less, back in Russia. And the Americans at that point were worried about every sort of Russians being a communist spy. So we live in an open scientific world, and Cold War, we know what a Cold War world. From the US point of view, this, to me, critical chart, this is from the NSF, and it goes just through 2017, but you see the incredible proportion of our science and engineers who are foreign born. The research that we'll do most focus on are the, that's the black line in the black dot, excuse me, and it's been going up, and we've already seen that the biggest group, some say, are very much on having the Chinese staying for a period of time in the US. The US and China are the major international collaborators. Look at the left side here. These are the absolute number of scientific articles, journal articles. We've only looked at the English ones here, and growing rapidly, doing international collaborations, growing rapidly. China doing international collaborations. The US has literally almost doubled its share of international collaboration in the last 20 years, from 24% to 45.7%. Slight decline in their international collaborations because China did not produce only with China addresses at the beginning of the period. 45.7% is the biggest collaborations we have with anybody, and the collaborations there are with us, and here we show the figures for that. And so US, China, divided by CJ is China, all collaborations. The US was 36.9%, that's the biggest. And the share of US, it's also the biggest for the US. And the US number 27.1% is number 6.9% because the US collaborates with many more people outside our country than China does. We are, in that sense, a bigger collaborator for China than China is for us, but we are China's biggest collaborator. Okay, that's the story of our collaboration seen through students coming here and the addresses on papers, because those collaborations are based on looking at, does the paper have a US address and a China address, or a US address, collaborative address, or a China, some other collaborative address. That is missing. This is what I'm talking about. A huge role of China in the US and worked in the US in China. Diaspora researcher in this person who is a Chinese name that tells they're born in China, but it's a scientific paper address. So their address is a address, and is somebody who has written a paper in the U.S. and then papers in China ask for attorneys. They have to have a Chinese last name, and their first name has to follow the mainland's translation system. So if your name is Jimmy Wang, you're not going to be counted as a Chinese diaspora because your first name is Jimmy. You're likely born in the U.S., although Wang would tell us you're Chinese. So we used, and then we identify and Denis referred to people going back. That's someone who is writing a scientific paper in China, and we search and find their earlier papers. And if they wrote an earlier paper with a U.S. address, they are now a diaspora. And now, before I go to some of the sort of things of how we get these numbers and what we do with them, I want to give you the main findings. And we're going to talk about first measured by it says presence on a paper. That means there's a paper written and it's going to be first at a U.S. address, Chinese double-named author who's the mainland, translation of the name into English alphabet. That's going to be a presence on a paper. 96.9% of papers with U.S. addresses have diaspora researchers from China. We then go to the returnees. We say, how many people who are writing in China, in the China address papers, and we say 38.3% of them had previously written papers in the U.S. The two countries are I don't know, I think of it as like almost twin. People who have worked from China are making up a large proportion of U.S. addressed papers, and people who worked in the U.S. Chinese name are writing a lot of Chinese papers. Then do what we call a fractional as well. A presence says just you have one, it counts as one. Or it's one Chinese, and it's 9 U.S. named people or non-Chinese named people. Well, you do a fractional count. You say, well, that's 1/10 of the credit, and the returnee researchers dropped to 8.5%. What this means is that the returnee researchers in China are working primarily with China, the US, and the US, they tend to congregate a bit of and we'll show you that in a minute. So if you've got one diaspora Chinese researcher on a paper, you're likely to have 2 or 3. But it is nowhere near the spread that you get from in China of the returnees. And then the third point is, in the US, a paper with a diaspora researcher gets into the higher site score journals, that's higher impact factor journals if you use the Web of Science, and they gain citations. So by those 2 criterion, these are the U.S. papers. And then we go to we look and say, well, what about these returnee diaspora? So these, think of them as at one point in their lives, mobile people. They are a large fraction of our research in both countries, and they are among the very best of the research. So it's an extremely important, partnership, I would say, from this number. This is now slightly, and just give you an idea of what we have to do to get these numbers. We start, and I'll explain it just for the diaspora people working in the U.S. We do exactly the same in reverse, sort of for the returnees in China. Get all the publications in the English language with one U.S. address. We distinguish, but all the addresses are U.S. and the ones that have also a non-Chinese address. So it could be the U.S. and France. And then it is ones with the U.S., China, and a non-Chinese address. And then finally, U.S. and China only.
Richard, we're gonna
sample those papers.
Richard?
Yes.
Okay, we are getting a lot of choppiness in your internet connection. So Qingnan is going to post the slides, and she's going to share her slides so we can try to stabilize your voice. I think that will help because we're getting you're cutting off. Yes. You're cutting in and out. Not your fault, just the internet. So Qingnan will put up her slides, and you can speak from her slides. Okay.
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 Okay. So is my screen on?
Yes.
Okay. So we'll start.
Yeah, we'll see if that does better. I'm sorry.
Yes.
Perfect.
Okay, continue.
Okay, and you can hear me.
Yes.
It's okay. Okay, this may I'll just blame Verizon and the internet here. We go into each of these categories of papers and we estimate the proportion or the number of people who are diaspora authors in each of the categories. And that 6.9% that I told you earlier, that's the fraction with these papers. Okay, you can go to the next slide. Qingnan?
Yes, we are in the returnee slide. Can you see that?
Oh, we are. Okay, sorry. Oh, you're faster than, or whatever. Okay, we do the same kind of calculation from the Chinese, and that's where we get to the 38.3%. And so it took some calculations to find this. Now, what's very important, many more connections between the US and China are from the diaspora or returnee papers that are from the jointly written papers, which had a China and a US address. And so here we show you that of the papers that link the US and China, 26.9% are diaspora papers, and only 5.2% address without any diaspora author. And then for the returnees, it's exactly the same. The major way Americans and Chinese are working together are through Chinese-born people working in the US on diaspora papers and returnees working in China. That's the flow of information. Okay, go to the next.
Okay, so can you guys hear me? because maybe Richard's disconnected, so I will continue from here. So
okay,
here,
very good.
Yes. Okay, so we have some paper calculations, and now I think it's a normal question to ask: what's the population of the diaspora or the like the non-diaspora authors on the U.S. address? And to do that, because we do like part of our calculation based on the based on the Scopus samples. So then if we like count the 2018 diaspora or other authors on the US address by how many times they appear on those papers, that will give us some overcounts, because if one author published more than one paper, so this author will appear on like several papers, so that will lead to those overcounts. And then to solve this problem, we use the unique author IDs provided by Scopus, which is supposed to tell us which author is which author. So do the name disambiguation for the authors. And that we give the detailed calculations in the Appendix B. But basically what we do is we calculate the total number of like author IDs like appear on papers by taking average author IDs per paper times the number of total populations, which is from the population counts given by Scopus. And then we divide it by like, we get another statistics, which is we go to those unique author ID we sampled and say, oh, how many papers they published in 2018. So we divided that number. So by the formula we're giving in here, we will like end up with our unit, like the population counts, which is we have a sample. For example, if like averagely one paper have 2 authors and there are 7 million papers, so we will have 14 million author IDs with some of the overcounts, which is also duplicates. And if we like found each of the author ID averagely published 4 papers, which is 4 authorships per author ID, then the 14 million divided by 4 will give us 3.5 million unique author ID. That's our population referred in here. And then we got the estimated population of authors, diaspora author, and also returnee authors, and the non-returnee authors at the Chinese address. And in here, we can see in 2018, like this is like the snapshot, so the active authors at that year, there are 14.2% of the US addressed author or diaspora author. And there are 4.2% of the active Chinese addressed author or returnees. And so we like, naturally the number is very clear. There are more diaspora authors in the US compared to like the returnees or in China. It's if we compare the absolute number, that's about 3 times the population. And then we did another calculation, which is a fractional count of the diaspora or papers on and also the fraction of the returnees on the papers. And the fractional count is we use the 1/n. So if one author on an author paper, we give 1/n to that author. And if an author published several papers, so that's kind of like the productivity weighted number of populations. Okay, so and if we do the fractional count, we found the diaspora share of all the US address on papers decreased a bit. And then the returnees fractional count of all China addresses increased. So that's reflect the diaspora author is published less papers per author compared to the returnee authors. And then we kind of there is we think there is this is a reflection of the differences between the diaspora author and the returnee authors. And we have some hypotheses. For example, that's maybe some cohort issue or the life cycle. For example, the diaspora author could be more more likely to be the younger researcher or the international students, as we present in the part 1. And the returnees, because like by definition, they has to have some like diaspora experience. So they could be more senior and more experienced authors. And then we try to give the evidence of this pattern. So we are giving the evidence in the following slide, which is the first one way to to kind of verify whether they are more likely to be a senior and younger authors, we get the first publication years of diaspora and returnee authors, and the mean for the diaspora is 2009 and the median is 2011, and for the returnee it's kind of earlier, so that's so that says the returnees seems to be a more experienced author. So both the means and median have about 3-year gap. And then the second evidence we found is their positions on a paper. As all the bibliometric analysis use, we can use a first or last author position to infer their importance to the paper, or kind of whether they could be more senior author. We know kind of the PI of a lab or kind of the director of a project are more likely to add a last author position. So in the first table in here, we can find that the returnees are much more likely to be a last author. It's 52% of the papers, the CO papers with the returnees, more than half of them, the returnees is in the last author position. Compared to the diaspora author, they are much more likely in the first author position and less likely to be in the last author position. So that's again verified. Okay, maybe the returnees, they are kind of leading the program. They have different roles in the China research. And then if we go to the, we have the kind of the third evidence, which is, how their role in affect each country's research. And we assume the returnees, they are kind of spreading more because PI, each project will only have one PI, but instead of the international students, they could be more gathered together, and that's also natural. For if you're a beginner, you're more likely to collaborate with your the people like you, and that's also observing another immigrants group. Okay, so then we found in an average USO papers with at least one diaspora author, there are 8 authors, and 33% of them are the diaspora author. So they just have more numbers in a paper. And then on the CO papers with at least one returnees, there are averagely 7.1 authors, an equivalent number to the USO papers, and there are only 1.4 authors are the returnees. So that's again says the returnees are spreading more, while the diaspora authors, they are kind of they are gathered together. Okay, so that's some evidence. Oh, sorry.
Qingnan, did you want me to try to
yes.
the next thing? But you'll keep the slides going. And
okay.
Okay, so keep going, and I'll give present the next slide, and we'll talk about that.
Okay, so the next slide is here. I will take it to Rachel. Okay, so you begin.
Okay, so this is a very easy one because it just shows that the diaspora papers in the US have higher site scores. In the Web of Science, that would be the impact factor, and they have more 3-year citations. And the returnee papers have also higher site scores and more citations than the China address papers that without the returnees on them. You also will notice that the site scores on the US papers are above the US press journals, and the citations are also a bit higher for the US papers. Go ahead. Okay, we did one other look at the qualities. We looked at, do you publish in Nature Science? So in the a huge share of the publications in Nature and Science in the US have of the US addressed papers, they have diaspora authors. Just take it's 42.9%, and the US makes up 28.8% of all the papers in Nature and Science. And for China, it's 75.7% of the papers that appear in Nature and Science with the China address, they have diaspora authors on them. Well, the Chinese papers only make up 10.3%. So again, the quality thing comes out in publishing in Science and Nature, and I'll skip over the issues with the citations, which show the same basic thing. So next slide. Okay, this will be the last of the heavy data sections, and we look at the role of the diaspora and returnee researchers as nodes in a collaboration network, who writes with who, and its citation network, who cites who. And we put this in compare it to the small world model that reflects so much of networks. And we're going to see that most collaborations of authors are with people, close by. So people at Duke will more likely collaborate with other people at Duke, or other people in Chapel Hill. In Boston, they'll collaborate with Boston people. And in China, the same thing. People collaborate mostly with people like themselves. But there is these long distance links that are supposed to connect different parts of the world. In the Strogatz-Rotz model, that's just a random thing. We say we can identify who they are in the China-US comparison. And they're going to be diaspora and returnee authors. Those are the people who make it, whenever there's a joint paper which has a US and a Chinese address, there is likely to be a diaspora author or a returnee author, or both, on the paper. And when we see citations, we'll show you in a minute that the citations, the same thing. The diaspora people in the US cite Chinese works disproportionately, cites papers with diasporas proportionally. So these are the key parts in the scientific network. Go to the next slide. And for analyzing the collaboration network, we do a very simple calculation. We say, what are the predicted proportions of diaspora and returnee authors on these collaborative papers if they just were randomly drawn from an urn, given their fraction in the population. And then we compare that to the actual representation of diaspora and returnee authors. And the next slide just shows the results from this calculation. And so the actual percentage, if you have a paper that is written with a Chinese address and a US address, on 60.1% of those papers, we get a diaspora author. On 51.7%, we get a returnee author. And the predicted percentages that if these authors were drawn randomly from their representation in the US population of publishing scientists, or the Chinese, for the US it's 27.1%, for the Chinese it was 7.6%. And so when these ratios are bigger than 1, that tells us that the diaspora or the returnees play a larger role. They're all bigger than 1. And in 80.6% of the jointly written papers, one with a China address and a US address, there is either a diaspora or returnee author. And the predicted proportion we had was 59.7%, and 80.6% if you do fuzzy Boolean analysis, that's viewed as necessary. So it's very hard to get a US-China paper unless there is a diaspora author on this or not. Now for the citation networks. We call it a double difference. We're going to look at how many citations from a China paper to a US paper involve a diaspora author. And then we're going to compare the citations that they give to a rest of the world control group of papers. So we want to see that if, let's say, China is paying a lot of attention to diaspora papers, a lot of citations to the diaspora papers than to diaspora papers in the US. And we want to make sure that it isn't that diaspora papers are better. So we're going to compare the Chinese papers in their citing with the rest of the citing. And then we have a little diagram that shows this. So you want to go to the diagram? Okay, we will be done. Yes. And so this is our result. And just again, we get roughly 2 times as many citations from CO papers to diaspora US papers, and we get the diaspora papers citing China papers twice as often compared to the control group of rest of world. Okay, we do the exact same thing for the returnee papers, and we get the same result. So we're just going to skip over this because we're running out of time, and it's just the same kind of graph, always comparing how the papers, how the returnee or diaspora papers are citing or being cited compared to a control group. Okay, the last thing, I'm turning it over to Qingnan, not because the internet has failed at my end, but we're now going to talk about the benefits from the scientific partnerships, and we will be done in about 5 minutes. Qingnan.
Oh, okay. So now we are giving you a lot of data. Now we want to give you some very vivid keys to show that like there are some real like benefits to the real world is happening because of this scientific partnership. And we are gonna first say, okay, so because the scientific knowledge, as people also with concerns, is roughly could have 2 kinds. The first is the scientific knowledge is the public goods. So in here, like the science advance will benefit the whole world. So the research area like includes the health research and climate change, and also some inclusive economic growth. And for the knowledge is kind of more sacred or private goods. So the science advance may benefit some more than others. So this is more like the national security and other areas. And to look at this, our work are focused on the first part of the knowledge, and we try to do something on the AI drug discovery, which the evidence was given in the appendix. But then a very recent article in Science report, there is a super kind of protein-based vaccines produced by China. So that's caught us attention because under the COVID thing, this seems to be a very, very good thing. And this China vaccine delivered by Clover is supposed to against all five variants of the COVID virus. And compared to the mRNA vaccines, it's more easier to preserve. And also there is another company also doing the same type of the vaccine, which is Novavax. And this Clover also have the pre-order deal with GAVI for 414 million vaccines and to provide to the low-income countries. So we think, oh, this is such a good news. So we want to take a look, to look more on this. But with the very urgent thing, we hire 2 detectives. One is Detective Cool Cat. Another is from the Canada, the Miss Melinda, to really give us more clue about what's hidden behind of this vaccine. Is that gonna really reveal?
Oops.
You need your screen share back.
Did Qingnan, we lose Qingnan?
Let's see. We lost Qingnan. We lost
Okay,
her. Let's see, wait a minute.
Oh.
She's coming back. There she. Well, let's see. There she was.
Okay, because I will do what she did. I will
Okay.
jump if I'm on. Having the two of us is very good. I'm going to rush to the part that. Okay, if she's back, I'll just go to the next thing. So we got this, received this document yesterday from these detectives, and on this Clover vaccine, because the key thing to us was, is this vaccine done through U.S.-China partnership, or was this only a Chinese invention? And it turns out on the 3 papers that the detectives found related to this new vaccine, they all had diaspora and they all had returnee researchers, and the researchers were either the first or last author on 2 of the papers. And so you see here the returnees divided by the total number of authors on the papers. Returnees are absolutely fundamental in these papers. Then I was going to say go to the next slide, but I'm doing it. We then went to the financial records of this company, Clover, and we found out they were partially funded by an Australian group that gave them funds in Australia. They have a subsidiary in Australia, and they got a huge amount of funds from a Chinese VC that was founded by a Yale graduate and a board member of Yale, Zhang Lei. They also received other funds from this coalition, an NGO fund, and got some money from the Singapore government. So the Chinese new vaccine has been supported by Western, countries and has a U.S. connection. Then we found that who's named Peng Liang Peng, and who is this person who was writing a set of articles about these vaccines? And this is the founder of the Clover Biopharmaceuticals, and the person CB checked off all of the boxes that we regard as connected to the U.S.-China partnership. He was an international student. He got his PhD from the University of Illinois. He was a postdoc at the Harvard Medical School. He was a diaspora researcher as a postdoc, and he's a return researcher to China. He was born in Chengdu, and his father, turns out, teaches biochemistry there. And the current head of the company is named Joshua Liang. We think Joshua Liang may have been born in the U.S., given an American kind of name. And so this quote, what Science headlined as great Chinese vaccine discovery, we would have said, oh, it's a sign of the collaboration and the partnership between the U.S. and China. And that's the last substantive slide. We are troubled by what might happen if the 2 countries broke up their partnership. That we would lose all of this knowledge being created, working with people from the other country, or being trained in the US and going back to China and working. And so here we just said, well, there's more to be done to estimate what the dangers might be, or the losses to the world, if this partnership broke down. And we don't have a model at this moment to say what we think this would do, but everything we've looked at says it would be a real negative thing in the advance of science. Now I'm done. Hopefully Qingnan is back as well. So I will say stop share.
Great, great. Well, thank you. I'm really sorry for the technical problems. We'll have to speak to Verizon about this and get on their case and see what, maybe we need some Huawei technology. So anyway, there's a very, very interesting question that comes right out of your research, and that is that if you are a sort of techno-nationalistic person and say, the benefits from training these people are accruing back to China, even if you want to say the world, but back to China, let's say, but they're not necessarily accruing back to the United States. I go back to Bill Gates' statement that, when Chinese PhDs graduate, we should give them a diploma in their left hand and a green card in their right hand. How does that situation and that perspective compare with what you're trying to tell us?
Well, we do know that the Chinese do stay here for a long time. 80% of them were here multiple years after they got their PhD. And I'm sure many of them do have green cards. And the issue with Bill Gates' statement is it should be up to the student, the person, to decide in which country they want to conduct their research. And if they see that it's better staying in the US, fine, they should stay here. And if they see it's better going back to China, that's fine too. As long as the bulk of the science is public knowledge, we will benefit from what the returnee researchers do in China. They publish it in scientific papers, and our companies can be located both in the US and in China, and the Chinese companies can be in the same boat. In an ideal world, we would just say let the individuals make their own best choices. Okay.
Let me pursue it a little more with there's a specific question from one of our audience. It says, I assume that you'll address this, but what is your response to the political claim that collaboration enables China to acquire knowledge that will be used to its advantage and perhaps in some way to the disadvantage of the United States?
That was the second point that Qingnan said at the beginning. We have not investigated how important that is. So there definitely is some kind of knowledge like that. We recognize that, and that should be investigated too as part of understanding the benefits to the two countries. I mean, maybe phrase it in a stronger way. You might say, oh, China is getting all this advanced knowledge from us, and they maybe, there's a word that the xenophobic people would use, they're stealing all sorts of secrets that they can use. And then the China response to that would be, you're stealing all our smart students, and they're working for you in the US.
Right.
So I prefer, let's let the young people make up their minds as to where the opportunities are. And obviously for defense and secret things, that's a different, a different story.
Okay. Another question, Richard, you worked a lot on global science and engineering talent. Are we in the midst of a global talent war? And if we're in the midst of a global talent war, what is that going to mean in the context of the data that you presented?
Okay. Yeah, well, if the global talent war is probably most driven by China now trying to get people back. And if China is smart, they will try to get a lot of non-Chinese guys to come to China as well. And that will benefit all the postdocs in our country who have trouble getting academic jobs. So I suppose I'm all in favor of the people who do the work, and the global talent war means more resources and more demand and more jobs for them. And again, as long as it is public knowledge science, everybody ultimately benefits. And if it's secret knowledge stuff, that's another, that's another story, because if it's defense products and things like that, the vast bulk of scientists are not doing that kind of work, however.
Well, let me put in another element to this. The United States invests, a certain amount of money in basic research, which is science as you refer to it, and China invests much less. We're in a 15% range. They're in the 5 to 6% range. Xi Jinping and the Chinese leaders have said they've got to increase more investment in basic research. But the reality that people are concerned about is that the amount of money that the U.S. invests, the benefits of it accrue, across the Pacific. That we provide the investment, but China accesses the knowledge. It's sort of a free rider argument, a little bit. Do you see that as a part of this equation? It's an emotional issue as much as it is a measurable, effect.
Well, I would just say that, remember, it was 26.9% of our papers are written with Chinese young people, mostly younger people. So a lot of our knowledge being produced in the U.S., which would first connect to U.S. firms being able to use it than Chinese firms. That's being done by young Chinese folks. Mm-hmm. It is true that the knowledge spreads very quickly, and but we have to understand that China has been a poorer country, and U.S. has been very good wanting to bring developing countries up to speed. We want to see them have fast growth rates and catch up. We don't want the world to get to be more unequal. We'd like to see it decline. And so, again, outside of some very particular defense type areas, I would not worry too much. If it's, let's say, it's some textile thing is done by some U.S. scientists, so I don't know, your textiles are more sensitive to weather things or whatever. There are textiles, they're working on that. Mm-hmm. And so say it's Chinese textile firms that produce the textiles, fine, our consumers benefit from that. And yeah, it's an argument can always be made almost by any form of trade. And okay. This is a traded thing. China sends us the young, bright people. We send back more experienced researchers and ideas. And yeah, and I suppose I'm enough of a free marketeer to believe that trade, again, exclusive of the defense and, clearly non-public good things, should be just done by people making their choices.
Great. Okay, here's a question regarding the data for nature and science papers. It says that do the returnees necessarily bolster the number of nature and science papers coming out of a particular institution, or is it more the function of the quality of the institution regardless of the returnees' work?
Great question. We haven't examined where the institutions were, and so that's something we can write down, and I appreciate that. We will be able to find that out because we know the institutions. And the same thing will be true in the US too. I assume that the US, it's the big, heavily funded institutions that would be having the science and nature papers, but that's an answerable question which we haven't addressed.
Okay. Right, continuing along those lines, another question is, Professor Freeman, in an early NBER paper, you mentioned that Chinese PhD students tended to be enrolled in some of the low-tier American universities. I wonder whether you have any update on this. Are Chinese students now being enrolled in PhD programs, et cetera, in higher caliber U.S. institutions?
I don't know for the 2020, yet, or 20, much less the biggest universities which enroll Chinese in the U.S. Were NYU, which is not a lower tier by any means, Northeastern in Boston. Those are the two biggest ones, and I assume that they are still among the very biggest ones. Yeah, we have not, again, did not do the institutional breaks ourselves. And there's been, in the New York Times article, they did say that the schools that were getting worried about getting Chinese students were the lower tier ones. That now there was going to be more, yes, you'll come to Harvard or Duke or Michigan or Berkeley, any of these places, but you may be less willing to come to a second tier state university, or small private college that doesn't really have world prestige of some sort. But we just don't know what's going to happen happening now and may happen in the next few years.
Right, and also there's a big difference between the undergraduate population, of course, and the graduate population, and where they go and how they end up where they do.
Yes.
Obviously, most of the undergraduates are self-paying, and money may be tight, et cetera. Whereas the graduate students, many of them are getting scholarship, fellowship, RA-ship, TA-ship, whatever, and helping to pay for their PhD. So it's a different situation.
Right, and the ones who tend to stay in the U.S. are the graduate students,
right?
Not the undergrads.
Particularly these days when it's so hard to get H-1Bs, a lot of people not having a choice to stay or go, they have to go back. So that's a big difference. Here's another question about jointly authored papers. Is there any evidence that jointly authored papers have a higher H-index rating than pure play US or China papers? This could be a powerful indicator of the increasing desirable impact of US-China S&T collaboration.
Okay, we only looked at the citations and site scores. They're usually highly correlated with the H indexes, but we certainly, that's something we could do that as well. It would be
okay.
We'd be looking at the H index of the people who papers. That's definitely doable.
Okay. There's so much controversy between public and secret knowledge. Much of the knowledge is these days seen as dual use know-how. How do we get politicians to make more rational choices, given the importance that you've shown about collaboration?
I suppose the only thing is for us to produce good evidence and then to talk with, I wouldn't necessarily say the politicians, but with the people in our government, or there would be the top civil servant type people, right, who are more, I don't know, I don't want to insult any political people, but who are more attuned to the evidence. And yeah, I'm very interested actually in having discussions with different branches of the U.S. government on whether we're going to have this breakup, which I think would probably be very bad, but we have to produce evidence to convince them, to show them. And that's why when you raise the issues, or we divided the things into areas where we think everyone would agree it's good, and the areas that we haven't explored yet, that where people would say, oh, that's dangerous, that, and yeah, that's something we haven't touched.
Right. But you may know during the Obama administration, there was a policy to build higher fences, but around more narrower areas. So control fewer things, but the things that need to be controlled, control them very tightly. Under the Trump administration, we went almost in the opposite direction. We greatly expanded the areas that so-called needed to be controlled, including some areas of basic research. And we almost cordoned off a lot of potentially fruitful areas in the name of, national security, et cetera. So there is and the Biden administration seems to be trying to figure this out. In other words, let's just say that we went from Obama and Trump in two different directions, and Biden administration is trying to say, wait a minute, we don't want to give away the crown jewels, but at the same time, we also, as you have suggested, want the world to benefit from the combination or the synergies that can be captured here. It seems that, when we used to talk about science and technology, we used to think of them as very different, but now we have science-based technologies. And now in the new Innovation and Competition Act, they're talking about use-inspired, basic research. So we're getting into an area where it's going to be hard to separate or distinguish between what is okay and what is potentially not okay. What do you think about that dilemma?
Well, we're proposing actually to some government agencies to try to provide the evidence on that. So if you take, I don't know, 20 fields or 20 topics, we assume that you could do a reasonable job of saying, well, these are the ones more dangers. These are the ones that are less, and obviously ultimately the politicians, the people we elect, have to decide where they want to draw a bounds. And this sort of social scientists, we can just tell them, this is what we think would happen on the basis of evidence if you drew a bound here. If you, let's say you were a real extremist in the US and you said, oh, we don't trust any Chinese virologists or vaccine makers or whatever it would be. Well, the whole scientific community would say you're nuts to do that. If one of us were to say, well, we should just turn over all of our nuclear defense information to the Chinese, that people would say you're nuts too. So we just have to get enough evidence to say to people, this is where it's risky, this is where it's better. And I find it hard to believe that it isn't in the vast bulk of places. It's better to work cooperatively and do things. Remember, the US, 45% of our scientists and engineers are born overseas.
Right.
And of that, the Chinese are the biggest single group. And here's something I believe, but we have no real evidence on. I believe that if you're a Chinese student in the US and you get your PhD or whatever it is, you go back more friendly to the US than if you were staying in China and not visiting us and not being with us. And that we actually win friends by having people here working with us.
Well, I may be in your camp because I also believe in an act of faith about that. But I think we have an increasing segment of the population that is somewhat skittish about taking that as an act of faith. Whether it's politicians or ideologues or whatever, but we've entered a period where there clearly isn't an opposing force that the internationalization of American universities, which has been one of the hallmarks over the last 20 years of how our universities have evolved, including this collaboration. Some people would argue, well, that's exactly what got us in trouble. We opened up the place and we've been, swamped by international students, and and maybe it's not the crown jewels, but we're giving away too much in terms of the opposite of what we're getting. That's, you know, it's good to have the data. I mean, I think that's exactly what we should be, what we should be doing. Let me pose another question from our audience, which is about secondary schools. We have a lot of collaboration between universities, but what about secondary schools? Is there any benefit to the United States and China from expanding the collaboration and exchange programs at secondary school level, do you think?
Well, my prejudice would be yes, but as you said, we actually would want to provide some evidence. If you came to the U.S. in a secondary school and went back to China, what are your feelings towards the U.S. versus somebody who didn't go? And similarly, if an American student goes to China and then returns, do they build up? I think what really struck me was prior to COVID, the huge numbers of Chinese tourists we had in Harvard Square every summer. It was just, Boston turned into a Chinese city from the Cambridge, not all of Boston. And I just saw everybody doing their ice cream and wanting to have pictures taken. And I kept thinking, oh, this is great. We're never going to have any wars against a place where they love to come visit us and see us and . Again, we don't have the scientific evidence that they could have said, oh, America, great place to go for a holiday. Let's conquer the country so we can make it part of China or something. I'm very doubtful that that's what people were thinking.
Right. Well, I don't think that's where we're headed, but at least we're, we have, as you know, we have something called the China Initiative that the Department of Justice and the FBI have been pursuing. There's some statistic that the head of the FBI cited that every X amount of hours, there's another case brought against a Chinese for alleged espionage or violation of IP. Or something of the sort, making it seem like there is almost a tsunami of effort directed to suck up knowledge legally and illegally in the United States. And that's also, you talk about returnees. We're also creating a situation perhaps where we're driving people back as opposed to having them simply, as you say, make a decision to go back. What can your work do to inform people with that perspective? And clearly, the United States does need to protect the crown jewels. I don't disagree with that. But maybe we've gone overboard. Does any of your data, you think, begin to support that? Maybe we need to modify that program because it's just gone, out of kilter in terms of what's really going on.
Well, we do know that when some of the cases or at least one important case, but I believe there's some others, when they brought them to court, the court threw them out.
Right.
It was, so there was, and this was probably, these cases began under the Trump period when they were trying to look tough. And so, if there are legitimate cases of someone, but most of the cases I know of were not stealing. It was that someone was getting some money from a Chinese university or think tank and not reporting it to their university as they should. And I think that will just stop because everybody understands now the government really cares. 20 years ago, the government wouldn't have cared at all because it was not an issue. And you would just take some Chinese money and do your research. And so I think that those number of cases will get fewer and fewer because people aren't going to do that. And remember, the big thing is just, are you reporting it? And I think the case it was University of Tennessee, I think it was
Tennessee, yeah.
Yeah. The guy said he was told by his university, don't bother, it's not so important. And if instead they said, if you give any money that you're, you're getting a US NIH or NSF, and you're getting some money for it, you have got to report that. Now the person will report it. So I think that's going to be a fast cure problem. This was not the FBI, I don't think, found anybody stealing, secrets about nuclear subs or something. Although we do know there were a couple of people they just arrested, but they were not Chinese.
They were not Chinese, thank goodness. Yes, thank goodness they weren't. I mean, not that that was good either, but thank goodness they weren't Chinese.
Yeah.
Okay, let me ask you one or two last questions quickly. One has to do with Chinese PhDs returning. If you put aside the China initiative right now, what do you think is the lure for Chinese PhDs now to go back to China? Do you think that these people who you see, responding to venture capital and some of the perks, this also deals with the 1,000 Talent Program,
yes,
and recruiting efforts like this. In other words, there have been people who've been very critical of these programs and said, they're not really working. They've created jealousy inside Chinese labs. They've had a negative impact as much as a positive impact. I wonder if Qingnan might make a comment about this, as maybe in her university she's seen that, and what the experience has been with returnees coming back.
I think instead of jealous, that's actually, for example, my a lot of PhD students, at least I know, they started to thinking go abroad because the universities, they do have some policy. For example, if you have some overseas experience or you have some overseas degrees, you do have some advantage in the recruitment, in getting a job. So I don't think, I think that's actually started to making the students want go out to visiting, because compared to other Western country, we are less likely to have those exchange or visiting experience. Like when we are at the college or the secondary school or other thing, I think that's maybe more easy for the European Western countries. And so I don't think that's something jealous. Instead, all people really want to get those overseas experience. And based on our data, I think a lot of those people still bring back the relations back to China. So when they back to China, they still works with outside of the country. And another thing about this, I think is really good, is those have a present in our research, which is those authors who kind of back to China and then back to US and then back to China. Something like, for example, I will maybe do some postdoc in the US and then I will get a job at China. And then maybe at some point I will choose to visit US for another 1 year. And I think those people are really active in really bonding the two countries together in the scientific area. And so that's kind of my own experience. I don't think that's something really have no effects or have some negative thing. At least the thing I saw is really push people to get more mobility or something. Yeah, so that's my view. Okay.
Richard, do you want to make a comment on this?
No, I agree with what she said. I have students from 15 years ago who came to Harvard for a year, went back, and we still work together. And they actually one of the former students, she's now a professor in Sun Yat-sen University. She was going to come, except the COVID stopped her from coming right. back. And I think the Zoom and the other ways of connecting people can keep these connections stronger and longer than they would have been in a world in which you had to be there personally. So hopefully that will keep us all together, even with some political issues.
Well, I think that we've really covered a lot of very good ground tonight, and I'm sorry we had the technical problem, but I think we ended up in a good place. And I want to thank Richard and Qingnan for their time and their hard work. Clearly, in 2008, I don't know if Richard remembers, but a professor Cao Tsung and I wrote a book about China's emerging technological edge, the role of high-end talent. And as we were writing that book, people kept saying to us, "You must meet Richard Freeman." So I'm glad that we finally got together and we're able to connect. But I really want to thank the two of you for sharing with us some, I think, very, very important data. And I think it couldn't come at a better time. Because, as I said, the Biden administration now is about to make some decisions that will have long-term consequences for China policy. And similarly, Chinese officials are having to determine just how vibrant the links with the United States are going to be in the future, whether or not they'll be severed, or whether or not many of the bridges that have been built over the last 40 years are going to be dismantled to some degree. So we are at a very, very critical point in time. And I think having data, I'm a fan of Chairman Mao. I'm sorry, some people don't like that, but I am. And his most famous important saying is, "Seek truth from facts." And so I'm really happy that we were able to get some facts on the table tonight, and that hopefully we can use those facts to argue what direction U.S. policy ought to be moving in, rather than just default to where it currently is at the present time. So let me thank everyone for staying the course, our participants, and for their good questions. Let me thank my friends at APSI, Alex, Renata, Xiaozhuang, and Yan Li for their support tonight, and also thank our co-sponsors at the Center for International and Global Studies and the Center for Innovation Policy. We appreciate your strong support for these kind of events, and we hope to see you in November. We'll have Professor David Zweig, formerly of the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, who has also taken a close look at these talent recruitment programs that China had put in place, and has done some very, very interesting research lately about internationalization of the Chinese Academy of Sciences. So I look forward to seeing you then. And again, thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Have a good evening, and everyone be safe. Thank you.
Bye-bye.